call to order the Planning Commission public hearing, Cape Charles Civic Center, 500 Tazewell Avenue, August 2nd, 2022. Roll call, please.
Strube present.
Buda present.
McCoy present.
Holloway present.
Grossman present.
We have a quorum. Can we all stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance? Join the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before I ask any objections, there was one comment in the minutes from May 3rd that was a leftover from something else, and it's been extracted. It's talked about, it didn't belong there. So anyway, does anyone object to approval of the consent agenda?
I'll move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. So we have the public hearing. The Cape Charles Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, August 2nd, 2022 at 6 p.m. in the Cape Charles Civic Center, 500 Tazewell Avenue, to receive comments on the following. A conditional use permit application from Barbara and Bill O'Hare at 11 Randolph Avenue, tax map number 83A3-2-3-1, in the residential 1 zoning district for an accessory dwelling unit pursuant to Cape Charles zoning ordinance section 4.2 Bowlegs J.
Okay.
Madam, zoning administrator.
Yes, I will give the staff a presentation of this. As noted, they are seeking to obtain a conditional use permit to convert 50% of an existing 720 square foot garage accessory structure for an accessory dwelling unit. They have signed the accessory dwelling unit affidavit, and they are aware of the requirements regarding length of stay. They have also indicated in their narrative that she's primarily looking to utilize as a personal office space for herself. The property is in zoning compliance, and she is not seeking to add square footage, but to convert a portion of an existing accessory structure for this purpose, and currently does provide one on-lot parking space, which would comply with our ordinance requirements, since no on-lot parking spaces are required for the principal residence in the R1 district. We have also received, that is my staff report, we have received one letter for this hearing, and it is from Steve Handy and Claudine Pierce of 10 Tazewell Avenue. We received the notice that Bill and Barbara O'Hare have applied for a conditional use permit for their property at 11 Randolph Avenue. We will be out of town at the time of the Planning Commission hearing, but wanted to provide you with our comment here. We are an adjoining property owner and have no objection to their application for conditional use. And that is the only comment we have received.
Make a motion that we close public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm sorry.
So, let us move on to, we don't have any other.
I have no citizen comment
No
period.
citizen
No,
comment.
nobody signed up, none submitted.
Okay, we have no unfinished business.
No.
New business. A, discussion and possible vote on conditional use permit 2022-004 application from Barbara and Bill O'Hare at 11 Randolph Avenue, tax map number 83A3-2-3-1 in the residential 1 zoning district for an accessory dwelling unit pursuant to Cape Charles zoning ordinance, section 4.2, Volex J. Discussion from the commissioners. Any discussion?
Well, I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair. Then we can
Please.
open for discussion. Make a motion that the planning commission recommend approval to town council for the CUP 2022-004 for an accessory dwelling unit at 11 Randall Avenue pursuant to our ordinance 4.2J.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. New business, item B, discussion regarding zoning ordinance provisions regarding accessory dwelling units. Madam Zoning Administrator.
Sure. Again, just as information relative to where we are in this process, as you know, the council back in 2018 adopted a zoning ordinance relative to accessory dwelling units. Most recently, we proposed amendments to that said ordinance. It went to the town council at their May 19th meeting to consider this. They held a joint public hearing with us on that proposed zoning text amendment on May 3. However, on the May 19th meeting, the town council rejected the proposed text amendment. As part of this, between myself, the town, and the town manager, we had a conversation as to what do we do next, how do we proceed moving forward. And we felt seeking some clarification from the town council relative to the vision and purpose, why we have ADUs, why this was adopted in the first place, how does this reflect within our policy documents, and how to move forward was proposed to the town council. And from that, the town council gave us some reaction back to it. And with that said, they indicated it was really not intended just for workforce housing infill development purposes. It was meant to provide a little more expansive use, especially for the property owner themselves and their associated family members to be able to use this and not be so restrictive beyond that. They also indicated that they wanted to be able to be more responsive if certain particular circumstances should arise from a financial need of a property owner or homeowner associated maybe with the death of a spouse or something of those criteria. It was challenging, to say the least, how we move forward. So with that said, we are back here again to consider a few items. They did narrow down what they wanted us to focus on. Sorry, I just got to get all my paperwork in order, and I'm just not quite there yet. So at this point, they've provided us those comments and are now seeking for you to take this up again for consideration and proposal of a revised zoning text amendment associated with the accessory dwelling units to make it more expansive in use by the actual property owner for the ADUs. At one point, there was some consideration that they don't see why this couldn't be by right to everyone. That did concern me, and I did express that at the council meeting, that I did not think I would support removing the conditional use permit requirement if it really has no criteria or meat behind it beyond just allowing accessory dwelling units, if they can fit on a lot, anyone can have one without there being any sort of restrictions or associated designated purpose for why we have them. I did express some concern that we are in the midst of doing an updated water and sewer capacity study, and at least the projections that have been forwarded out to those consultants doing that work right now, we gave them no indication that an ADU component could increase greater than a certain projection number we had included in that calculation. So that also was of concern to me, and I expressed it at the town council meeting as well. And I'm not saying that we can't address that and eventually have capacity, it just wasn't part of the initial assumptions and analysis that were forwarded out with that study currently more than halfway through its process. So So I wanted to make you aware of that and bring it back to this group to figure out how we wish to proceed moving forward. If we want to schedule some work sessions here in the next month or so to start working on this and see if we can develop a revised document to go back to the town council. So I open the floor to all of you at this point.
I have a question, Katie.
Yes.
You highlighted the areas that town council thought we needed to pay attention to, correct?
Yes, I did. That is in your entire staff report,
Right.
yes.
Can you explain to me on page 7, item number 2, promote compatible infill development and renovation within established neighborhoods, and the first bullet of description? What was their issue with that?
On page 7, hang on one second.
Well,
I don't have the page
that's in the-
numbering, so
That's in the
It's on
PDF.
page 46 of
Oh, I'm sorry.
it's okay.
the,
Yeah,
it's
you're
part,
right.
it's out of the comp plan, current comp plan.
So read that one more time to me, Dennis.
Sure. It's page 46 of the PDF. Item 2, promote compatible infill development and renovation within established neighborhoods. The first bullet of the description underneath that title line or heading says, promote accessory dwelling units to add diversity of housing type while maintaining the neighborhood character and providing affordable housing options.
They didn't have an issue with the entire statement. They did not feel it was restrictive just for affordable housing criteria. They
okay,
expressed the need that may have been the intent under prior leadership. But as they read it and are now hearing to the citizens at large, they felt they wanted to be more responsive and not as restrictive. Not that they're opening it up en masse, but wanted to say that if the property owner had extended family coming to
Okay.
visit, they would be allowed to utilize the
Okay.
ADU.
Yeah, got it, okay.
I did express, if I'm recalling, it may have been directly or as a side comment that evening, I did express that would be hard from a staff perspective to monitor what's the difference between one type of user versus another type of user. So I have some thoughts on ways that we could approach how to potentially plug the hole, so to speak.
The other thing I wanted to point out
so-
was that I think this is identical phrasing to the study that the county consultant did on behalf of the county for housing. It's also up for discussion this evening.
Yes.
So whatever we do here, we gotta, but if we do anything at all, we have to make sure we keep that in mind.
Sure, and I guess part of, I think, our staff's concern and what we've been trying to administer over this past year plus has been ensuring compliance with the ordinance requirements, the criteria that is articulated in the zoning ordinance, which
Right.
does stipulate a 30-day rental period for the use of it being an accessory dwelling unit. There is no criteria that stipulates, are they workforce housing type rates or anything of that nature?
Right,
No.
right.
I am presuming part of that criteria came into being is to ensure it didn't become a short-term rental unit. And so maybe instead of, one of the approaches I have been thinking about is, and again, I hate negative statements of criteria within our ordinance, but sometimes maybe you just can't avoid them, and this may be one of those circumstances, is if this board recommends, and that's really what the town council is trying to achieve, that they really don't wish to see ADUs going as short-term rentals either, maybe we just need to state that as one of our criteria, that it cannot be for a short-term rental, which is defined as a rental of a period less than 30 days. That may be one thing that closes the hole here, which still then allows a property owner to utilize that unit for overflow from their own guests or family members visiting them. It doesn't preclude
let me
them,
make a
because they're
comment.
not really renting it.
I understand. If I'm not mistaken, council has a different view of what the breakout point is between short-term and long-term, and I think it's 60 days. Am I correct?
We're proposing 60. And they didn't really take issue with that.
Okay, okay, good, all right.
That big hurdle, as our zoning administrator was saying, is the use by families and friends.
Yes.
And they didn't feel that we should impose any restrictions on that.
Got it,
So
okay.
for me, it's as simple as
Removing the last four words?
yeah, just, as Katie was saying, just
5 words, whatever.
limiting that it can't be used for short-term rental, period.
Okay,
It's as simple to me as that.
okay. I don't have an
Well,
issue with
there's a couple of other things, the intent statement, the definition of.
So there was some question that maybe our definitions of kitchen were
that. Yes, right.
in some sort of conflict, and so I think we can address that, just to ensure that we show forward in our documentation, when we go to back to council, what is in the building code. We have a chart that makes it really simple. This is the building code definition, this is what was in our zoning ordinance, or not in our zoning ordinance at all, and here's where we're proposing to go to solve these boundaries or
So-
these issues.
So
Yes.
if it, hypothetically, if we agree on the short-term rental thing, what's council's, or do they even have anything about doing away with the cup?
No, the cup, I think they can go, they would like it, I think, permitted. I was a contrarian, I think, that night. But since sitting on this and thinking about it further, saying, okay, so what are my really bone of contentions here? The oddity here, there's a lot of ADUs that are in ordinance space across all the states, and particularly, Virginia, and I've been going through those. Where we get hung up with is the restriction of 30 days, or 60 days, whichever, that we're trying to avoid additional short-term rentals. So we're a little bit different from the others. But other than that, we're kind of in sync. The intent and the intent on our comp plan is similar wording that you'll see in other ordinances. And there's flexibility on places where I saw today, an owner had to be in one house or the other. Other cases, no, you can rent both out. So I think we're at the point where we have nailed it down, except for the issue of CUP and, to me, the no short-term rentals, period. And that opens up then the door for family use.
Well, and I think the trip hazard that hit us last summer, was the fact that I considered certain elements going into a structure, an accessory structure, as triggering the threshold of, that's really a kitchen. You may not have a stove, but you've got all the other elements that you've put in here. You've put in the bathroom, you put in the bedroom space, the living space, you've met the square footage requirements. You're telling us you really want to use this as a rental capacity vehicle, but then receiving contrary statements from the building official indicating, well, because there's no stove, that's not a kitchen, I would not classify it as such under the building code. And while he may not, and the building code can stand alone, and under building code inspection purposes, then it's not. But for us, if we define it, whatever that definition is going to be, if that's what we define from a zoning perspective to say, that's really an ADU with these 3 essential elements or 2 essential elements, then that's the standard we need to be using, regardless of how it gets inspected from a building code perspective, which is a different standard. It just is. So,
I would suggest that you consider a toaster oven or a countertop oven as an addition, but only if it's really necessary.
right.
But I agree with what you just said, yeah.
So the state building code only says that a kitchen has to be a place to prepare food. There is nothing else in the state building code
Right.
that talks about appliances
Right.
that must be
Right,
present.
right.
So I think the concern of, well, then almost anything, if that's what a kitchen is, a place you make food, could be considered an ADU if it has a place where you're making food, a countertop, where you're putting out your peanut butter and jelly. And then it doesn't have to fall under other regulations, which is why I think we need to tighten it up a little bit so that we can say there needs to be certain kinds of safety regulations going on there. And it does need annual inspections, and we do want an affidavit saying it will only be rented for a certain amount of time. So I think we have to include some sort of a definition that, that triggers that, but does not go as far as you must have a stove and an oven.
Right.
Well, you have that definition already there. Kitchen means a space within a structure designated for preparation of food. Yet we tagged on, that includes a sink.
Right.
Put a period after the end of food.
But there were council people who objected and said that's not, we need to have more things in there. We need to state that if you're gonna call it a kitchen, it has to also have a stove.
Okay,
That's
I didn't get that from the council meeting. I
I
don't
think
know,
there's-
Katie, if you remember.
a councilman who sits in this
Yeah,
general
it's
vicinity.
Mr. Fulmer, yes.
Yes.
But I didn't, I sit next to him, so I'm paying attention to this one since I've got to come back and work with you guys.
I've got to.
No, that was a specific thing that he mentioned more than once, about that's not what a kitchen is.
And that's fine. What I'd ask is the zoning administrator to go visit him and say, okay, here's the definition that we have.
Well-
How would you like to mark it up?
If I recall correctly, his exact concern was it wasn't expressive enough, because when you look at that, well, could you do a preparation of food in a space that has a sink? That could serve as a bathroom as well. And that was his concern, was would there be some assumption or application of saying, well, it's got the bathroom, that's where you could also do food. We'd call that the elements meeting an ADU. I think that was his concern. I don't think he expressly said it has to have a stove or something, but he didn't want anybody to walk away thinking a bathroom could also equal a kitchen definition, that's all.
The other thing I'd add, the conditional use permit, I kind of want this permitted, however, by right, but at the same time, if you're limiting, since we're different from a lot with the 30-day requirement or 60-day requirement, then it puts us into a place where how do we can monitor that. We monitor short-term rentals across the board, okay? But how do you hit up for violations? Right now, we have words in the ordinance that we could bring you to town council and then remove the cup. So if you put this by right, the question I would have is there is another mechanism
Yes.
that you could hook into.
Sorry, I'll let you finish your thought.
No, other than the cup removal.
Yes, that is like any element of this ordinance. Just because it's a conditional use permit, it might be the vehicle of how it gets approved today. And yes, there are particular enforcement actions associated with it because we can stipulate additional terms or conditions outside of what's in our zoning ordinance. So far, we haven't done so with these ADUs. They've complied with the terms and criteria, and that's what we've been adhering to and enforcing. Relative to any other violation, if it's not allowed by right or they deviate from the by right use that is authorized, we do an enforcement action under the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, and the
Just-
penalty is what?
Well, right now, your penalty section under your current zoning ordinance is a criminal penalty section, which means that we would go to the magistrate and swear out a warrant against this
It's a
section.
misdemeanor 4.
Yes.
Yeah,
A class,
okay.
I think it's a class 3 misdemeanor.
That carries all of $1,000. If you
Yes.
go by state
Yes.
code, per our code is $250. So
Yes.
that's not hurtful
No.
to somebody that's renting without knowledge.
And it is my hope as we move forward with the proposed zoning text amendments that will be forthcoming later this fall, associated with our consultants' work, Summit something, sorry. That we will propose and hopefully successfully pass a revised violations section of the ordinance and move us away from a full criminal composition of enforcement over to a civil penalty section. So that's something I am going to be proposing when we get to
Okay, but
future
could the
zoning text
civil
amendments.
penalty be a removal of the ability to rent that ADU?
We could potentially set up some standards of number of times of the violation, of the recurring violation, et cetera. It doesn't preclude us, if we feel that they are so egregious and continue to do it, there is a way to write our ordinance so that we could also simultaneously pursue a criminal prosecution as well if they are egregiously violating, and actually advocate for jail time at that point. But I'm not saying we're ever headed down that way. Could we set it up so that if they say get 3 violations within a certain time frame or just in period, could we permanently revoke their permit?
What permit?
Well, right now, well,
You don't throw people out of their houses, right?
I'm not saying you throw them out of their house, because right now this is an ADU.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm saying is,
And so
Equivalent.
typically, if it's a tenant they have in there and there are some violations because of the homeowner relative to the property, yes, it would require us to get the homeowner to evict them, the tenancy, until they can bring the property into compliance with the
No, I'm-
elements of their
okay,
conditional
I'm-
use permit.
trying to be real clear, if they violate and rent as a short-term rental, that's
That's a-
where I'm looking to have it revoked. And the question is, what are you revoking?
Well, it could be two things. So it could be the use by right. As long as within the use by right, we have established what are the criteria of that use by right? What are the standards?
Which we will, right?
Which we will. So yes, that's a violation of the zoning ordinance. And so that would, again, depending on the elements of how you've written up your penalty section, your violation and penalty section, it could be a financial obligation. It could be some sort of permanent ban on them receiving this as it stands. Because we should be, but we're currently not, but in theory we are. Every zoning approval I issue is a written document. I just don't have the time or the staff to create the zoning permit per se. But it's a decision of the zoning administrator and it stands. Unless somebody challenges it within 30 days, that is the decision. And my clone is in the back, sorry.
Just checking the volume to make sure you can be heard.
And then from that, we could continue to enforce it from a per day violation. So the costs could truly add up to the point of making it painful for a property owner if they continue to violate. And my experience has been a financial burden tends to get a better response than even the threat of court, I'll be honest. So as long as we can move over to the civil penalty sections, that I can issue a violation on a daily basis, or, sorry, the statute requires the same violation within a 10-day period. So I could issue the violation every 10 days until they come into compliance and
All right, so
charge
what
whatever
I'm
fee.
hearing, for my benefit, is you can remove, if we so choose, move away from the cup and permit by right
Yes.
with all its criteria and leave it to you to,
Well, I would say one of the criteria is indicating that a violation compliance standard, meaning if you receive so many violations that are upheld within a defined time frame, then you cannot be issued a zoning permit within the same calendar year. So
all
if you
right,
have,
but in our markup,
Right.
we're right now striking out that section. Do we need to keep, because right now we
Well-
say failure to do results in you going before town council, which I'm not sure what we would do.
sure. Well, again, part of this is we need to decide, do we want to continue these as cups? Or do you want to move them as by rights? Which we were at a by right recommendation before. I was recommending that, assuming we had a very tight criteria definition of what an accessory dwelling unit is. I'm not feeling as comfortable that we have that firmed up well enough to move us away from a conditional
All
use
right,
permit process.
I'm there. with
So,
certain wording changes here to address your short-term rental piece. The kitchen, we can debate and decide on, but I'm not sure what else you want tightened up here in order to get to a permitted, by right?
I'd like to add something. Safety should be paramount, the number one thing. Because if safety isn't adhered to and checked on a regular basis, part of that annual inspection, these accessory dwelling units could become potential big time issues.
And we have
And-
added safety into our criteria.
But also, the other aspect of that safety is, in most all cases probably, these accessory dwelling units are behind a primary residence. Can the fire department get there? So that safety issue has to be an assessment done and checked on a regular basis to make sure that if you're gonna have someone actually living in there on a long-term basis, that it's accessible by the fire department. If they've got smoke detectors, in some cases they might need carbon monoxide detectors, those type of things for a dwelling unit. Okay? I didn't see that in here.
Well, it is, it's right here in three E, certificates on an annual basis are to be provided, one of which is an annual affidavit for town for safety compliance for accessory dwelling units.
and I provided.
But
yeah,
that,
they
if
are.
I recall, was a self-certification as opposed to
That's correct.
Jeb's
the
updated.
building
That's
administrator.
correct. No different from my home, right?
Right.
You get your
Right.
There may need-
certificate,
Pull that forward.
and then I don't have a yearly thing. How do you know what's going on in my house?
But if you're renting this, then, well, no, we're saying it's available for, right, long-term rental. A rental property does have to have that.
Okay, but even so, if a person, let's just say, take the extreme, the person just continues to have family, every couple of weeks or whatever, they are still gonna have to submit these documents.
Right.
And affidavit regarding short-term rentals and blah, 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 and safety, and yet, so,
It's an annual requirement.
right,
And it just, I guess, comes down to, is self-certification okay, or do we need another independent? So we had talked about self-certification before, because currently we just don't have the
yeah,
staff.
to me, I view it as the burden is on the homeowner to ensure the safety of their particular structures, and if they're renting out, that burden goes along with the ADU. The burden shouldn't come back to the town. They are responsible should something happen in that house. What we're asking is prove to us at least these minimum things are checked off. Sign the bottom line. We don't have to go look at it. Sign the bottom line and save us the trouble of walking through those motions.
And part of that, and I apologize if I didn't share this with you, I know we provided over to the town council what a proposed safety affidavit would look like from the building official that the applicant would have to fill out. And part of it, they would have to attest. So it's not just their signature, it's the statement of attestation associated with it. I think we included a notary signature as part of it too.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I can't either, so I'm about to pull it open, but anyway. So I'm with you in that regard. So yes, it is a self-approval process for us, what we're asking for. It doesn't mean that if we feel, oh, we're not really sure that that's accurate. We left room in this process for the building official to be able to go independently, review and confirm this data and check it. And that there's a twofold value to that, because again, under the building code, and again, by them signing this, because this is an element of the building code official's responsibility, we're making it part of his responsibility. And under the building code itself, if you make false statements relative to the building code, there's a greater penalty over there too, that is separate and apart from what the state law allows a locality to impose. So it gives us a chance to also enforce and deal with penalties associated as a result from the building code side of things. And so, yeah, we want people to understand when they submit documentation, not just to me in my office, but to Jeb in his office, there are responsibilities associated with that information submittal and accuracy, and they are swearing to us it's true and honest. And if it isn't, there's a penalty associated with how we're gonna have to clean that up. Yes. So, sorry.
So are we making an assumption that when an accessory dwelling unit gets a code official's certificate of occupancy, or do they get such things?
Well, they don't. And that's what Jeb had shared with us when we first met with him and the other town officials. It doesn't qualify for certificate of occupancy. He is open and receptive to creating a different type, similar format, just not called a C of O, because that's a very official term under the building code. I think we're gonna call it a certificate of completion from the building official that certifies that sleeping can happen in these quarters in compliance with the building code requirements.
Sort of the reason, Mike, I was thinking, if that initial certificate or whatever it is, and it is a code official making that determination,
Mhm.
that the safety aspect of it is part of it, then they get an initial check, and then year in, year out, they're attesting to they have maintained that.
Yes, and that is the intent of what we proposed when we forwarded this over to council, is that very thing.
Yeah.
Is there was that concern, and so as we learned through the process, as Jeb said, no, he didn't issue a C of O, but he's willing to issue something compatible to, just for the ADUs as they come online. And then, yes, they would be subject to an annual certification, submission back into our office of, are the, smoke detectors current, batteries in them, or is there a fire extinguisher?
That process will work. I really do.
And we have written in, again, in our draft, the fact that the code official will issue a certificate of completion, is what we call the accessory
That's
dwelling.
what I thought.
Something that's equivalent to you moving into your house. Well, you're moving into your, he does the structural, electrical, water pressures, all that stuff, in addition to the safety.
Right.
So that we already have captured, and then it's a yearly attesting from the owner of the maintenance of certain safety aspects.
It's clear from item specifics that the council wants long-term affordable rental units. Can we say that accessory dwelling units are long-term rental units, i.e. duration of 60 days or greater?
No.
No.
Because council also wants the flexibility if the homeowner should need to utilize that accessory dwelling unit for overflow of family members or of their own visiting guests.
Well,
That does not involve a rental, and it can be utilized for such.
we could change the definition of an accessory dwelling unit to one that involves rent or something, and otherwise, if people just want to use it for an office or something, it wouldn't, fall under that definition. I mean, they have a fundamental right, I guess, to use, as long as the zoning meets the zoning things.
Well, that's part of this conversation that we're having this
Yeah.
evening, is trying to figure out, because we were proposing to add an intent statement that helped clarify what our primary purpose of allowing and encouraging ADUs. The council, again, did not want to be so restrictive
Yeah.
that it would preclude a homeowner from being able to use it as a spillover for their own company.
But we can't call it a long-term rental unit, right? And that.
If it's rented, it would be long-term.
Right, if it's
and
rented.
That would
Right.
eliminate anybody's idea of this being a vacation rental and that
Right.
sort of thing.
And that's part of, I think, I mentioned it, I think Paul may have echoed me, is maybe we do need that declaratory statement in here. There is no short-term rental, and we include what that definition of short-term rental is. So, is that 30 days or is that less than 60? Whatever may be our preference.
So, I'll just say, and maybe we come to consensus and come back with wording, but I'm for making this a permitted condition.
Right.
excuse me,
Permitted?
by right, excuse me, permitted by right. All right, and then changing really length of stay to a statement that basically limits it or not allows short-term rentals. And then continue to say 60 days.
For long-term rentals?
Or no, I'd even say 60 days or below is a short-term rental.
Oh, okay. Seems to me long-term rental.
See, I
covers a lot of it.
I think that allowing a 60-day short-term rental is begging for the owner to say, well, I might be able to get away with this, just what we were talking about here. Whereas 30 days, you know,
No, I'm not following though what you're saying. Repeat that.
I'm just saying, if you want a short-term rental of 60 days or less, whereas short-term rental out here and for all the other rentals is 30 days or less, and there is a definition, I'm sure, of a short-term rental.
Yeah.
And so I think we should stay with that definition.
So you're saying move away from 60 and go back to 30?
I'm saying move away from 60 for short-term rentals. However, if you want to actually rent this to a long-term rental, for a long-term rental, then it has to be 60 days or greater.
Then we'd have two definitions of short-term. For an ADU, short-term would be anything less than 60 days. And then for a house, it would be anything less than 30 days.
All right, so we have a definition in there. We need to play with it with regards to perhaps eliminating the phrase short-term rentals, which is not in there right now. But just indicate that, 60 days, and we may have to tweak it, rented beyond 60 days and more. I think you got the basis to most of what you need there, and maybe.
Long-term rental.
Well, it's under length of stay. That's where we're capturing this.
Yeah. I'm looking at that. It's just that, I think when we went from 30 to 60, it's because we wanted to ensure that rental was actually gonna be a long term, okay? And, so, I think we even talked about it, like, okay, somebody, a teacher or somebody has the summer and for some reason they only had an 8-month lease. There are those around, or 9-month lease, and they need another place to stay. And so they found a place here, a short-term rental, and they could do it for 60 days,
All right,
90 days.
but our wording right now indicates the dwelling unit shall be occupied. Okay, whether paying or not by people over, consecutive calendar days, 60. The shall says I can't use it for any other purpose than that. And that's a bone of contention relative family and friends.
For no less than 60 days, consecutive calendar days.
Instead of occupied, if we said rented, and then took out the whether paying a fee for such occupancy or
Yeah,
not.
that could work.
No, I'm not, it's fine.
And I'm not sure we wouldn't have to, again, for clarity, I had written, when not rented, the ADU is available at any time to family and friends. So that there's no reading into the language there. That aspect is also included in this paragraph. So that opens up.
I'm for that. I mean, that sounds
Yeah.
good.
Right.
So then the only other thing is the definition of a kitchen.
I like what Ken said.
Well, I think that, you're right, and I looked at this up, and I think the way we have it defined in here, we just say kitchen means a space within a structure designated for the preparation of food, period,
That meets the state requirement.
period.
Which you're saying agrees with the building code.
Yes. And that was where we ran into the issue with a previous ADU, that people were saying, well, it's not an ADU because it doesn't have a kitchen. And under this definition, it certainly would have, because they advertised a space where you could prepare your snacks and that kind of thing. So that would certainly work for us.
All right, so do we capture the length of stay adequately there?
I think I've gotten it down. I'm not sure where you want me to throw available at any time to family and friends of the property owner. I missed where you want me to insert that in this document,
The length of stay.
within the length of
Yeah,
stay.
yeah.
And again, should I clarify just to make sure that that available and at any time to family and friends, but not for a fee?
Right.
No money should
Right.
change hands for
Yes.
that.
Yeah, you can repeat that too.
Yep.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
And getting back to the cup versus permitted, what's the consensus there?
I'm all for making it as easy as possible for the staff and for us and for town council. So we don't have to have everybody that wants to have an accessory dwelling unit has to go through a cup process.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's my take.
I don't think we've ever turned one down, and I don't think council has ever turned one down.
And you can see tonight, a perfect example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're stretching this person's desires out for over 5 months, 6 months since we canceled, our meeting here. So I think the consensus there is we go the permitted route, and by right, I keep saying permitted, by right. And I'm needing to ensure that we will eventually have a hook relative to violations.
And the other question, I don't know if the council said anything about this, but I know it's been brought up that the owner has to live in one of the two or whatever. I think we were pretty clear that's not necessary. We have that right now. We've already approved an ADU where the owner lives in England, so.
There was a lot stated. It was a tough meeting to take.
I know, and there, like you said, there are several property owners or homeowners that own several properties here.
Right.
So, you can't live, every other night or something, but.
We may want to add, I think that Jim's point on fire, that part of the safety certification includes something from the fire department that, yes, this building can be, because Jeb did bring up a question about how do we know if someone is living in there, how does the 911 system know where to go? Because that's
The
even,
address is what.
but the ADU doesn't have an
I
address.
know.
Well, part of that is if the person in the ADU does not have a mailbox, they have a post office box, it's not going to be registered with the fire department as, like, for instance, 403B versus 403. So as a result, that becomes the safety issue. How are they going to send the fire department to something that doesn't exist?
Well, to me, the fact of a fire is in the backyard as opposed to in the main house will tell the fire department where they need to go.
But if you're in an ambulance and there's nobody in the front
Send
house,
them this now.
there, that's a
They'd be able to get it.
non-permanent resident, but somebody is living in the back, that amount of time, we just have to figure out a
It's on my
system
desktop.
to ensure that safety.
Okay, I look at it as a normal house doesn't go through that kind of review. And I'm not sure why.
But it doesn't
The
meet-
normal house has an address, a physical address. the ADU does not have.
Yeah, I understand.
Unless it uses the physical address, and, you know, and somehow it's tied to the main address.
Then that's actually not addressed through your zoning ordinance. I'm actually not even sure if you, maybe it's through the town code, you guys deal with street addressing requirements of the standard methodology of how you deal with that. So if that's what you want, then that's through a different document. It's not the zoning ordinance. That's all I can tell you.
And I look at it as the same thing, if somebody has a heart attack
Yeah,
on the corner of Fig and Washington or whatever,
Yep.
it's just, they'll get to you. You have to call it in and be specific on where you are.
Yep.
I'm in an ADU behind
Such as that.
238 Randolph, or whatever.
Right.
That's the way I see it.
I'm just getting ready to email to all of you the rental housing inspection checklist draft that we shared with the council at their May meeting. Yes. So give me 1 second and I'll finish typing you guys in.
So are
So
we,
yeah, so do we have? Katie probably can't do two things at one time here. I'm sure she can, but.
Go for it.
Okay. You have everything that we've discussed
Between
enough?
myself and Tracy, yes,
Do we need
I
does
think
this need a motion?
we have everything.
Well, I think we gotta come up with a clean draft.
yeah,
right?
so
Right,
Katie
it would
could,
come back as a draft, and then
Okay.
we would share that at the same time
Alright.
with town council, because again, we would have to start the public hearing process all over again for zoning text amendment. So again, we would rather not spend the resources and commitments if that's really not going to be supported by council.
Okay.
So I think this time, well, not this time, again, we will share in advance with them what we're thinking, yes.
Did you send that to our personal email or to the town email?
I sent it to the town one just now.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten it yet.
Mine buzzed.
I haven't gotten it yet.
Okay.
The internet is very sluggish because there's quite a few people online. I'm having
Oh, good.
problems with myself, that's why you're probably not.
Okay, no, it's no big deal. You know. If not tonight, I'll get to it Thursday. It's no problem.
Okay, so you have enough to get back to us next
I
next
believe
meeting?
so, yes.
Okay, good,
Yes.
good.
Okay.
Any further discussions on that item? If not, new business 7C, discussion regarding report commissioned by Northampton County entitled Overcoming Land Use Ordinance Barriers to Housing Development dated May 27, 2022 by the Berkeley Group. Okay, so everybody was given a copy of a table that Paul put together, and I'm gonna let Paul talk. Paul and I did talk. I looked at this, so, Paul?
Okay. Let me just back up. About probably a year and a half ago, I had come up with this kind of idea and approached Charlie Kolakowski, our county administrator, to see if there was a potential for grant money in order to conduct this particular item. So he submitted it through the county, and obviously we wanted to ensure all the towns within the county were captured, and therefore eventually the Berkeley Group, this took probably a year to get through the system, and the Berkeley Group took 6 to 9 months. So that's where we are. It's kind of a one of a kind where they swept through all our ordinances, and there's a lot of detail.
Yeah, it sure is.
So I said, okay, so how would I eat the elephant here? And he said, fine, let me propose, in taking it by a factor, and I just used the example of factor 1, diversity in housing stock, and I said, fine, let me read through the document, extract what I found as either a finding applicable to Cape Charles or a recommendation that's applicable to Cape Charles. And I just pulled those in to really the first column for factor number 1. And it came out to what? 7 items. And then obviously the next column is the study location. And then I said, fine, maybe they're wrong. Let me substantiate what they did. So the next column would go through a substantiation in reference where we would find the material in our Cape Charles zoning ordinances, if that's where it's found. Then from there, say, okay, based on their recommendations or comments, would we propose any additional changes then to our ordinance space in order to address this particular item or not? They may have a recommendation to do such and such. We may go, oh, that's so overwhelming and it's not beneficial in our minds. We just kill it. That would kind of be your 4th column, and then the pros and cons relative to that being the last. That's how I felt that we could probably tackle one factor a meeting. And not necessarily say we're gonna get through it entirely. We may have some open items. So when we're up to factor 3, we start the meeting with, okay, we had an open item for factor 2, this one, and here's how we are proposing an answer to it. Then let's get into factor number 3 and go through its list. I don't know how much I'm gonna be pulling out for all the factors. There's 8 of them. So, you know, by the time you go through, you know, we could have 50 factors or 50 things that we're dealing with here. But it's so complex, we should be able to, in the end, come to a conclusion. We've captured all the barriers, and now we need to figure out how best to address it. So what I'd recommend is proposing a subcommittee. I'd be on it as a member, would, you know, would provide the kind of template for discussion on each of the factors. I won't come necessarily to a conclusion, and if I do, I'll make sure it's in parentheses, this is Paul's opinion, and then we can go through, and I think it's more digestible, and if it takes 8 months, it takes 8 months. Maybe some of the factors only has a couple items, and I can put more than one factor together.
Yeah,
They will.
it'd probably take more than 8 months just to go through this by hand. Yeah.
So I would be on that subcommittee with you.
Okay, okay.
And I guess we have this conflict of, we can't have more than 2 people on a committee, subcommittee.
Well, if you do, then we need to
I haven't-
advertise
I
it
know that, I know
and
that.
meet
That's
the
why-
open meeting law.
that's why-
all.
It's an official meeting, yeah. Is that okay with everybody? I only do that because I am interested in this too. There was a discussion going on here earlier, just before we started about, you know, where we stand with workforce housing here in part of Northampton County and the town, so, anyway.
Yeah, once we leave tonight, I'm gonna send this, I've got now an in to Cheriton, and I've got an in to the planning commission at the county level, and just saying, okay, here's a way that we're gonna tackle, think along the same lines, and I don't want this just to go on a shelf,
Right.
certainly at the county level.
Yep.
And never interested in workforce housing to affordable housing.
Katie, do you have anything on that? Do you have any thing to add, or?
Anything specific you want of us, other than what Paul's proposing?
Well, I assume you want your staff to participate with the 2 members of the subcommittee, or not?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll be happy to chime in as we read through this report. Yes, I have actually read through the whole report and marked it up. So I'm prepared. I'm ready to go on this.
All right.
So I have some real thoughts on some of their recommendations and consistency. I've shared some of my general policy comments because I think we are, as one of the town units, we have one of the smaller lot size requirements to build just a house on. And so to some extent, I want to ensure that whatever considerations we're doing that the county approach their consideration so that the sole burden of providing these sorts of affordable housing stock issues don't just sit back on the towns. Or if they do, then there should be some consideration for us bearing the greater density
He's got input
development
from me from
issues.
earlier discussion about
So,
trying to throw it back in their court. You know.
And-
No, they're
That's just
very
one man's
involved.
opinion.
They're very involved
Yeah.
with housing.
right, and I recognize, there are housing costs that we have, that the county also has, but just in a different way, meaning there are infrastructure connection costs for
Right.
utility services.
Yep, yep.
While the county doesn't have that, there still is an infrastructure investment cost for the property owner. Because it's probably about the same cost to put in a septic and well, definitely a septic, as it is to connect to the town's system. So it's about equal in cost. So I don't think we're unique from that investment cost that we require anybody to develop our property. It's the same at the county level or elsewhere where they don't have water and sewer, especially many places where the land may not perk. And so you're looking at alternate systems that run pretty close to what the county connection fees
Yeah,
are running.
the other thing that report talked about was consider changing setbacks and parking regs. And I thought that parking regs, that's gonna be a non-starter, because we've been fighting that battle for a decade more or more, and we're still not where we wanna be. So,
So there, like you said,
Good.
there'll be certain findings,
Yep.
Right.
recommendations that we just.
yep. Next,
Good.
exactly.
Well, thank you.
So to some extent, before we leave this building this evening, I guess I'd like to get with you and when we would like to
Have our
set up
kickoff
a
meeting.
schedule for this.
That's
Yes, yes. Because I really don't want this to take 8 to 12 months,
No.
All right.
I have one.
or at least our piece of it not taking that long.
One point from that document that makes me think the county thinks that we actually have a lot more affordable housing, the way the county looks at it, than we do is on page 19, where they say that Cape Charles allows options for small, single-family lots as low as 5,600 square feet, where I think the entire town was platted with lots 40 by 140, which are 5,600 square feet. And so that's the norm, not options for that sort of thing. And so if a house on that kind of a lot is considered a part of a diverse plan, then we've got lots of them.
Well, I think one of the elements maybe omitted from this particular statement is, yes, 5,600 is our minimum square footage lot size, but also associated with that development standard in our ordinance indicates a minimum and maximum house size too within that definition. And so that's not stated here, maybe that needs to be added. There may-
It is in the document.
Right, it is elsewhere, it's just not in that particular section he is quoting from. And so maybe we need to pair those together, because they're not a float alone of saying, well, the minimum size of a house you can have is 900
Right.
square feet. Well, no, it's tied to a 900 square foot to a maximum of,
4,500.
thank you, 4,500 based upon this size lot.
Okay.
Yes,
And I think we're the only town that has that.
right. So, and again, this study may say, well, there should be additional diversity requirements or apartment buildings, but again, that size lot is appropriate to a town development concept, which is different than, say, candidly, the county at proper, in the unincorporated areas of the county. Their development is going to be a different kind of development, because they're not meant to be closely compact and knit together like we are as a town. And our town is different than
Oh, that's
the other
fine.
towns.
Okay.
So,
All right.
okay.
Any other questions? All right, moving on. Reports of officers and committees. I do have something that I would like to get back to us, Katie, and that is the status, if you will, on, I know that the strategic plan has 3 years, maybe 4 years, the sidewalks. So the question is this, there was a sidewalk study done by the town, Main Street, and it was given to the town, and it recommended certain things. One of those things that it recommended were crosswalks. And they had put out crosswalks, you know, they did a pretty thorough job. They had like for example, they had crosswalks at all the entrances on Bay Avenue to the beach.
Right.
They had crosswalks at the corner of Washington and Fig. Matter of fact, it was a raised crosswalk. And then they had crosswalks in town at almost all the major intersections, okay, across Mason. So, plus, there was also additional parking identified on Mason Avenue, parallel parking, all the way from Peach down to Fig. There's no parking on the north side. There's nothing marked, okay? And the same thing was on from Pine to Bay. And that was all put in there. And so the question is, who do we have to go through VDOT for the crosswalks? Or does the town, is the town on the hook for crosswalks if they get VDOT, I mean, if they submitted a plan? How does that work?
Just yesterday or so, the town manager had asked VDOT to put in crosswalks there at Randolph and Fig, and then again at Mason and Fig, and there were diagrams about
see,
that.
we-
So
that-
that was a step in the right direction.
That's in that plan. So L.B. Davis did that. She gave that to the previous town planner, okay?
Okay.
So,
Well, then I presume this plan went to the town council.
No, it was before
I-
me.
Okay.
I don't know if I don't know if it went
Well,
to the.
then I can follow up with Mr. Hosey and find out, is that the plan he is working from? Because Mr. Strube is correct, certain items just recently went before the town council. I think because they had finally made it through the VDOT review process and now got approved. So there were 3 that I thought were at the last council meeting.
Correct. We
On
had
the
a
agenda.
resolution, and it really was an outgrowth, not from the study bill, but it was an outgrowth from the Historic District Civic League.
Right, I
They have
know.
a subcommittee on
Right.
that.
And matter of fact, they mentioned one of those crosswalks up there on Bay Avenue. But
But it requires VDOT to answer your question before.
Yes, it requires VDOT. Whether the town has adopted and is working off of a concept plan, that I'm unsure of. So that I can find that out.
okay, I'd appreciate it because.
It was prepared by
if-
a task force.
Yeah, it was a task force comprised of citizens, Cape Charles, Main Street people, the town planner and the town manager were on that task force,
Okay, approximately when was this?
2018.
Okay.
Because there was a separate sidewalk committee that I was on in 2018, so you gotta watch the confusion here. It was only for sidewalks in my particular case in the historic district.
And the one you're talking about deals with sidewalks, crosswalks, and potentially some
Crosswalks.
parking
Mainly crosswalks, you know.
recommendations.
It was the parking, and then the crosswalks, and then they also had loading zones in there.
Yes. Two loadings.
And loading. Okay. And then you're telling me there's a separate committee around the same time that was just focused on sidewalks?
Sidewalks, yeah, a subcommittee that we presented,
Okay.
and that's in the, yeah, Diane was,
One was on Pine and the other was gonna be right by the medical center.
He's talking loading zones.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they talked about loading zones, and, they were almost saying, well, if you're gonna have.
So again, I know certain documentation was also provided to our consultants. Again, I will talk with John what documentation was provided to them, because as you recall, in our existing conditions report, there's some data associated with number of parking spaces available throughout town, the sidewalks, and other associated infrastructure elements.
So Ms. Holloway was on that committee as well, so she
Okay.
is a good source as well, so she
Okay.
knows.
Well,
but
and again, I'm presuming any study was forwarded on to the town council and accepted, and they have that as a policy
I don't
document
know,
now.
but I don't.
That's the question I've been asking too.
I don't know if she, well, I'll tell you what.
Because I
Andy
keep hearing it
Buchholz-
come up.
Andy Buchholz would know, because he was,
Okay, well, I'll work with our town clerk to see if she can help me determine if it's an adopted policy or some sort of documentation that they accepted officially. And I'll consult with the town manager if he's aware of it as well, and it may be an easy one to answer, I just don't know it because it's the first time I'm being asked about it.
So just as an aside to that, like I said, I noticed in the strategic plan that it shows monies set aside for sidewalks, probably starting at 2024, 25, 26, and 27. Is that based on the sidewalk study? So that will complete all the vacant sidewalks, right? Correct. And here's, I know that there was they had a firm come in here like last fall that did the sidewalks, the ones where the trip thing. I guess that was, had been identified by the town, or?
Yeah, it came up, I think, through citizens again,
Okay.
and VDOT,
To do a traffic count?
no, this
This
is
is a-
trip hazards.
Trip hazard, you know,
Oh, trip
like
hazards,
on the sidewalks.
tripping.
Oh, they fixed them. That's what he said.
Yeah, tripping.
Sorry, not
They did
trips.
the one right in front of
Trip.
her.
Okay.
Grinded them down.
Right. Again, I know that was recently referenced from the town manager at one of our department head reports about VDOT doing some work about grinding down some trip hazards in town. Again, that may have been just a walkthrough from VDOT and acknowledging and addressing those. So some are readily fixed, some may take a longer-term solution because that whole chunk or section of sidewalk may need to be replaced, not
Right.
just grind down portions of it. So.
Anybody have anything else?
I have one thing. Katie, when you get a chance, it's nothing urgent, but would you check the distribution of that email to make sure my town address is on it? Because I can get to the internet just fine. I can pull up CNN, no problem. I've updated the machine with the latest Chrome OS. It's still not showing up.
Okay, so maybe I just need to confirm I really am using the correct county address for you, or the
Yeah.
town address for you.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's fine. Thank you.
Okay,
But I'll pull it when I get home too, so,
okay.
and I'll let Tracy know one way or the other. So I won't leave you in the dark if I find something.
Okay.
Okay, so next item is standing staff reports.
Was there anybody else that needed to unload?
I heard mine beep. so
We got time right now, so I want to make sure. Okay. From the July report, I did provide you that again. We have finally signed off on the Dreams by the Water subdivision.
Can you tell me what that squiggly blue line is on the plat?
Where am I? Sorry, mine are not in color, what the copy she gave me. Oh, I can't read this small, Paul. I'd have to
Okay,
go,
okay,
I'd have to go
okay.
pull the
It's just-
large
it just-
plat I approved.
I tried to look at something that tagged it, but I couldn't.
Yes. No, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. And that was for the 10-lot subdivision. From the Board of Zoning Appeals, at the July BZA meeting, we had an application from Spen Custis at Lot 100 on Washington Avenue. This is part of what we knew was going to be a violation enforcement order, so he did run ahead of that and applied relative to an existing shed he placed on the property and trying to now get it permitted. I will make you aware, since we've been through the July meeting, the BZA denied that application. And so we are now working with him to allow the appeals period to run its course of that BZA decision before we start the enforcement to physically get it removed. Mr. Custis has been in touch with me, and he does plan on submitting an application to relocate that shed to his house that he owns further down on Washington Avenue, and he is working on getting that paperwork into our office. Additionally, this has come up before us before, relative to 107 Mason Avenue. We are working with the current property owner, Nancy Rooney. Initially, she was trying to see how we could move this forward through a variance application. And again, in the research I've done and what this town has done relative to first floor residential approvals in the commercial district has been a little spotty, to say the least. They've been handled different ways on different applications. I actually do not think a variance application is the right path for that consideration, because the law is really clear on this, and in fact, we do have an opinion from town council on this issue as well. So we would prefer not to be contrary to our legal advice if possible. So with that said, I have indicated I'm trying to reach out to potentially see if we could look at a rezoning of not just that lot, but maybe an adjacent lot that would make a little more sense in that section of town, because when you actually drive that last block fully, you have a stretch of residential properties down there. And so it might make sense for us to consider a rezoning application instead. So we are working on that with her, and hopefully we'll bring something back later this fall as to where her options reside. And then lastly, this is now out formally, item C. We are going to public hearing next week to the BZA meeting for 2 applications that have been filed at Washington Avenue and Bay Avenue for creating 2 lots down there for the placement of 2 homes on those lots, on that corner property. It used to be the old ferry dock station, as I've heard it referred to. It has been, those lots have been in existence since at least the 20s that I can research and verify. So they are pre-Bay Act lots. So they have some status associated with being a legal, non-conforming or conforming lot under the Bay statute, meaning they were in existence before the Bay Act came in. So we've got a process to work through, but that's what's coming up at next Tuesday's BZA meeting.
Okay, are those standard lot sizes for 2 there?
Actually, yes, they would be. They would be in compliance with our ordinance requirements for lot sizes. They're oddly shaped,
Yeah, they are.
and there are issues with trying to address compliance to road frontage with requirements and things of that nature, so that has made it a tad challenging. But more so, this is really dealing with first ensuring, can we overcome the requirements of the Bay Act to achieve zoning compliance before we can go any further down that road of zoning compliance, so. And now for the August report, very similar. We have signed off on the final site plan approval for the mini golf project that was before you some time ago. As you can see, when you drive out of town, work is finally progressing on that lot. As I mentioned, that application is in with the BZA for the Hainsworths for this corner lots. And that's it, is all I had.
I guess you worked out you worked miracles or something on the Kellogg building, huh?
Did I work miracles? How have I worked miracles?
Well, I know that there was a problem in as far as propane was a big thing.
That has not been resolved. So right now, all they are doing is some demolition work specifically focused on the asbestos and lead removals, which would need to happen regardless of what may happen in this building. They are aware they have not achieved zoning compliance yet, and they know of the issues that they need to resolve to achieve zoning compliance yet. So any work or approvals that we may issue henceforth will be at grave risk to their own financial investment if they cannot resolve the issues to achieve zoning compliance, which do
Where is
include,
this?
First, 1 fig
yes,
or 2
which,
fig.
one or 2 fig, I forget what the number is, but yes.
1
And
fig.
they resolved how we're going to figure out parking there?
That's one of the issues that they would have to come into compliance. Again, it's not as extensive as you may think, because if you look at the parking regs, how it's written up, doesn't mean they have to comply as if it's a brand new structure. This is a conversion of an existing structure and use. And so it may not be as extensive as you like, but they still need to resolve and provide certain amounts of parking spaces. As Mr. Stram has indicated, they will also have to address how certain code compliance issues under the building code need to be resolved for a commercial kitchen before we can issue zoning compliance. Because that's not something that can just be handled with a lease of property. It needs to be fully under the control, because again, once we approve it, it needs to always be able to allow for, say, the exhausting of the fumes from a commercial kitchen, and there has to be a certain distance of that exhaust system from adjacent residential property. So that can't just be for the next 5 years because it's under lease, and then in 5 years that lease terminates. That doesn't mean in 5 years the restaurant goes away. It just means it needs to be resolved so it's permanently under their control, or else we cannot approve
I
it.
can't remember what it came before, planning commission or ZBA.
It came before the planning commission
Yeah, it was top.
Right.
top.
For,
Top, yeah.
But,
Yeah.
right, but that is no
Residential,
longer
commercial.
valid because that was under a different applicant, and that's not what the current owners propose to do. So those conditional use permits are going to either naturally expire, or eventually I will move around to just formally repeal them. Yeah, I think Joss's hasn't expired since he came forward to renew it. Yeah, because that happened while I was here. But anyway. So yeah, they still have not achieved full zoning compliance. They are aware of that requirement and working hard to see if they can get resolution to do that. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. That's it.
All right, so our next meeting is September 6th at 6 PM. So it's the day after Labor Day. All right. We have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you both.
We are adjourned. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Libby.